A retired man, believed one last ride would prove he was still strong. But when he mounted his black horse that morning, he had no idea his own body was about to betray him. Before we begin, subscribe, like, and leave a comment to help us continue bringing emotional stories from the heartland to those who understand resilience, loss, and quiet courage. At 74, Samuel Harlan still woke before the sun, not because he needed to, but because his body no longer understood rest the way it once had. His joints ached before dawn, his chest felt tight in the mornings, and his hands trembled slightly when he poured his coffee. But Samuel ignored those things. He always had. Outside his small farmhouse, the pasture stretched wide and pale under the early light, and standing near the fence, dark against the mist, waited the one creature who still made Samuel feel whole, a black horse named Noir. Noir lifted his head the moment Samuel stepped onto the porch. His ears flicked forward, alert, familiar, loyal. The horse hadn't been ridden in months. Not since Samuel's doctor warned him to slow down after the fainting spells. Samuel scoffed at the memory. Slow down felt too much like surrender. You and me, Samuel murmured, pulling on his jacket, just like old times. Noir snorted softly as Samuel approached, his breath visible in the cold air. The horse stood patiently as Samuel brushed his coat, fingers lingering longer than usual, as if memorizing the feel. Samuel hadn't told anyone he planned to ride today. He hadn't told anyone because deep down he knew they would stop him. The saddle felt heavier than he remembered. Samuel paused, catching his breath, pretending to admire the sunrise while his heart settled into a steadier rhythm. "You all right, old friend?" he whispered to the horse. Noir turned his head slightly, dark-eyed watching Samuel with quiet concern. Samuel tightened the girth, ignoring the dull pressure blooming in his chest. He placed his boot in the stirrup and hesitated. Just for a second, his hands shook. His vision blurred faintly at the edges. Then pride took over. Samuel pushed up. The moment he swung into the saddle, a sharp wave of dizziness washed through him. The world tilted. The sky spun. His grip slipped instinctively to Noir's mane. "I'm fine," Samuel muttered aloud. To himself, to the horse, to the years he refused to acknowledge. Noir shifted uneasily beneath him, sensing something wrong. They took a few slow steps forward. Then it happened. A sudden, crushing pressure seized Samuel's chest. Not pain exactly, but a terrifying heaviness, as if something inside him had simply shut off. His breath vanished. His arms went weak. "Wait!" Samuel gasped. The rein slipped through his fingers. Noir stumbled to a stop just as Samuel's body tilted sideways. Weight gone, balance lost. The fall was not dramatic. It was quiet, final. Samuel hit the ground hard. The air forced violently from his lungs. The world exploded into white and black, and then blurred into nothing but sound. Noir reared back in alarm, then immediately lowered his head, circling Samuel with frantic snorts. The horse nudged him gently, then harder. Samuel didn't move. His chest rose once, then didn't. Noir let out a sharp, desperate whinny that cut through the empty pasture. The sun continued to rise. The world continued to turn. But on the cold ground, a retired man lay still, his body finally demanding the truth Samuel had refused to hear. And beside him stood a black horse who did not understand illness or age or pride, only that the man he loved had fallen. Noir did not run. That was the first thing that mattered. When Samuel Harlan's body hit the ground, the black horse startled, muscles tightening, hooves scraping dirt, but he did not flee the noise or the sudden stillness. Instead, Noir circled Samuel in short, frantic steps, nostrils flaring, breath sharp and uneven. The man did not move. Noir lowered his head and nudged Samuel's shoulder with his nose. Once, then again, harder this time. Nothing. A low, confused sound rose from deep in Noir's chest. Not a whinny, not a call, but something close to grief. He stepped closer, placing himself between Samuel's body and the open pasture, as if shielding him from something unseen. Samuel lay on his side, one arm twisted awkwardly beneath him. His face had gone pale, lips tinged faintly blue. His chest rose once, shallow, uneven, then stilled again. Noir froze. Animals understood Many things humans pretended not to. Stillness like that was wrong. The horse nudged Samuel again, this time at the chest, then at the face. When there was still no response, Noir lifted his head and let out a sharp, piercing cry that echoed across the fields. It was not fear. It was a summons. The sound carried farther than Samuel ever could have imagined. Over the fence line, toward the dirt road, toward the farmhouse half a mile away where the nearest neighbor sometimes worked early mornings. Noir cried out again. Then again, between calls, he returned to Samuel, pressing his warm breath against the man's cheek, as if trying to lend him life. He pawed the ground beside him, restless, agitated, unwilling to accept the stillness. Minutes passed. The sun climbed higher. Noir's cries grew hoarse, but he did not stop. Finally, movement appeared near the road. A truck slowed, stopped. A door opened. What in the world? A man muttered, climbing out. Noir saw him instantly. The horse turned and ran, not away, but toward the stranger, stopping abruptly, blocking his path, eyes wild, body tense. Then Noir turned back toward Samuel, took several steps, and looked over his shoulder. The message was unmistakable. "Hey, easy," the man said cautiously, following. "What's wrong, boy?" When he saw Samuel lying motionless in the grass, the color drained from his face. "Oh, my God!" He rushed forward, kneeling beside Samuel, fingers fumbling for a pulse. "Sir? Sir, can you hear me?" No response. The man pulled out his phone with shaking hands. "I need an ambulance," he said urgently. "Man down. Looks like a cardiac episode." As he spoke, Noir hovered close, never touching the man, but never leaving Samuel either. The horse's eyes tracked every movement, every word. Sirens sounded in the distance far too slowly. Samuel stirred faintly then, a weak gasp, barely noticeable. The man leaned closer. "That's it. Stay with me." Noir snorted sharply, relief flickering through his tense body. He pressed his nose to Samuel's chest, as if encouraging the breath to come again. Samuel's eyes fluttered open for just a second. The sky above him was painfully bright. His chest felt crushed. His limbs wouldn't respond. "Noir," he whispered, not aloud, but somewhere deep inside. The horse heard it anyway. Noir let out a soft, urgent nicker, lowering his head until his muzzle brushed Samuel's neck. "Good boy," Samuel tried to say. Nothing came out. The sirens grew louder. Paramedics arrived fast now, voices calm but firm, hands practiced and precise. They moved Samuel onto a stretcher, attaching monitors, administering oxygen. Noir back away only when forced, and even then, only a few steps. He watched as Samuel was lifted, the man's body looking suddenly too fragile, too small. One of the paramedics hesitated. "That horse isn't leaving." "He won't," the neighbor said quietly. "I've never seen anything like it." As they wheeled Samuel toward the ambulance, Noir followed, stopping only when the doors closed. He stood there, ears forward, eyes locked on the vehicle as it pulled away. The pasture fell silent again. But this time, the silence was not empty. It was waiting. Hours passed. Noir paced the fence line, retracing Samuel's path from the porch to the pasture again and again, as if trying to understand where things had gone wrong. He stood by the spot where Samuel fell, lowering his head, breathing in the scent of the man who had always come back. Night crept in slowly. Lights appeared in the farmhouse windows. Neighbors checking in, leaving food, speaking softly when they saw the horse still waiting. "He hasn't moved much," one said quietly. "Just watches the road." Noir lifted his head at every passing sound, waiting, trusting. Miles away, in a hospital room filled with steady beeping and white light, Samuel lay unconscious, his body finally forced into stillness. Doctors spoke of blocked arteries, of years of ignored symptoms, of a heart that had worked too hard for too long. But none of them spoke of the black horse who had refused to leave him because some bonds didn't show up on monitors. They showed up in who stayed. Samuel Harlan woke to a sound that didn't belong to farm, a steady, rhythmic beep cut to the fog in his mind, mechanical and unforgiving. The air smelled sharp and clean, nothing like hay or earth. For a long moment, he didn't move. He didn't open his eyes. He was afraid that if he did, the truth would settle too heavily on his chest. When he finally did open them, bright white light greeted him. Hospital. The word formed slowly, reluctantly. His chest ached, not sharply, but deeply, like something bruised on the inside. A plastic mask rested against his face, cool and unfamiliar. His arms felt weak, heavy, as if they no longer fully belonged to him. "You're awake," a voice said gently. Samuel turned his head slightly. A nurse stood beside the bed, smiling in a way that tried not to show relief. "Easy now. You had a cardiac episode." The words landed harder than the fall. A cardiac episode. Samuel swallowed. Throat dry. "The horse," he croaked. "Noir, where is he?" The nurse exchanged a glance with someone behind him. "He's safe," she said carefully. "Your neighbor's looking after him. He didn't leave the pasture all day." Samuel closed his eyes, a shaky breath escaping him. Good. That was all that mattered. A doctor came in not long after. Calm, professional, carrying a tablet filled with things Samuel already suspected and had spent years avoiding. "You're lucky," the doctor said, not unkindly. "Very lucky. Another few minutes without help, and this could have ended differently." Samuel stared at the ceiling. "I know." "No," the doctor replied gently. "I don't think you do. Your heart has been warning you for a long time. Dizziness, tightness, fainting spells." Samuel winced. He remembered every one of them. Every time he'd brushed them off. Every time he'd said, "I'm fine." "You can't ride anymore," the doctor continued. "At least not the way you did. You need medication, monitoring, a different pace of life." The words he had dreaded most finally arrived. A different pace. Samuel turned his head slowly. "If I don't listen?" The doctor met his gaze evenly. "Then next time, your horse won't be able to call for help." Silence filled the room. Samuel's jaw tightened. The image rose unbidden. Noir standing over him, calling into the empty pasture, refusing to leave. The idea that the horse had done more to save him than his own pride ever had made his chest ache worse than the illness. "I scared him," Samuel whispered. The doctor nodded. "Animals know when something is wrong. Sometimes before we do." After the doctor left, Samuel lay awake, staring at the window where afternoon light filtered in. For the first time, he allowed himself to think the thought he'd been avoiding for years. What if I can't be the man I was anymore? The question felt heavier than any diagnosis. That evening, his neighbor Frank Miller came to visit, a quiet man Samuel had nodded to for decades but rarely spoken with. "You gave us all a scare," Frank said softly, pulling a chair closer. "That horse of yours. I've never seen anything like it. He wouldn't let anyone near you until help came." Samuel huffed a weak laugh. "Stubborn," he murmured, "just like me." Frank hesitated. "He's waiting. Still watches the road." Samuel's throat tightened. "I won't be long." Frank didn't answer right away. "Doc says you gotta slow down." "I know." "You gonna?" Samuel didn't answer that either. The night passed slowly. Machines beeped. Nurses came and went. Samuel slept in short, uneasy stretches, waking each time to the same thought. If I ride again, I might not wake up next time. By morning, the decision pressing on him from all sides. When he was finally discharged 2 days later, his body felt weaker than it ever had. His legs trembled as he stood. His chest felt tight with effort. And yet, the moment he stepped outside the hospital and saw the familiar shape waiting across the street, something inside him steadied. Noir. The black horse stood behind a temporary fence, held loosely by Frank. His ears snapped forward the instant he saw Samuel. He let out a low, urgent nicker that made several people stop and turn. Samuel's eyes burned. He walked slowly, each step measured, heart pounding, not with illness, but emotion. Noir met him at the fence, lowering his head immediately, pressing his forehead gently against Samuel's chest. Samuel rested his hand against the horse's neck, fingers trembling. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm all right." Noir breathed against him, warm and real. Frank cleared his throat quietly. "He hasn't eaten much. Just waits." Samuel swallowed hard. "I won't do that to you again," he murmured to the horse. "I promise." But even as he said it, fear crept in, because promises were easy. Change was not. As Frank helped Samuel into the truck, Samuel looked back one last time at Noir, standing still, watching, trusting. The fall had not only broken Samuel's pride, it had broken the illusion that love could survive denial. Now, the question was no longer whether Samuel wanted to keep riding. It was whether he loved Noir enough to stop. The farm felt different the day Samuel Harlan came home. Not quieter. It had always been quiet. Not emptier. Noir still stood at the fence, solid and alive. But altered, as if the land itself knew something fundamental had shifted. Samuel stepped down from Frank's truck slowly, one hand braced against the door. His legs trembled under his weight, weak in a way that unsettled him more than the hospital bed ever had. Noir lifted his head immediately, ears forward, dark eyes fixed on Samuel with the intensity of something that had learned fear. "Easy," Samuel murmured, though the words were as much for himself as for the horse. Noir approached cautiously this time, stopping a few feet away. He sniffed the air, nostrils flaring, as if checking whether Samuel was real, whether he was whole. Samuel reached out, resting his palm against Noir's neck. The familiar warmth steadied him, but it also hurt, because warmth reminded him of movement, and movement reminded him of everything he was no longer allowed to do. "I'm home," Samuel whispered. "I made it back." Noir leaned into the touch, but his body remained tense, ready to react. The horse had changed too. Samuel noticed it in the way Noir watched him walk, in how he matched Samuel's pace instead of leading, in the way his ears flicked at every uneven breath. The horse was guarding him now. That realization cut deep. Inside the house, Samuel sat at the kitchen table with his medication spread neatly in front of him. Pills for blood pressure, pills for rhythm, pills to remind his heart how to behave. He stared at them for a long time. The saddle hung by the door untouched, cleaned, oiled, waiting. That night, Samuel dreamed of riding, not fast, not recklessly, but freely. Wind in his face, Noir's powerful body beneath him, the sense of being part of something larger than weakness. He woke with tears on his face. The next morning, Samuel made the mistake he'd been avoiding. He walked into the barn. The smell hit him instantly. Hay, leather, memory. Noir followed him in, stopping just inside the doorway. Samuel's eyes drifted to the saddle, without meaning to. "I can't," he said softly, as if someone had asked him to try. Noir shifted, ears flicking forward, waiting. Samuel stepped closer to the saddle and placed his hand on it. The leather was smooth beneath his fingers. Familiar. He imagined lifting it, setting it on Noir's back, mounting slowly, carefully. Just once, a voice whispered inside him. Samuel's chest tightened. He stepped back abruptly, breath coming too fast. "No," he said aloud. "That's how this ends." Noir snorted softly, stepping closer. The horse nudged Samuel's arm, then his chest, not demanding, not urging, just present. Samuel rested his forehead against Noir's neck and closed his eyes. His voice broke. "I don't know who I am if I can't ride you." Noir stood still, breathing steadily, as if offering his heartbeat in response. Samuel stayed there for a long time. Days passed. Samuel tried to fill the hours with other things, fixing small things around the house, reading, sitting on the porch and watching Noir graze. But the loss of riding was louder than he'd expected. It wasn't the movement he missed most. It was the partnership, the unspoken conversation between muscle and breath. The way horse and man became something singular. One afternoon, Frank stopped by again. "You look like hell," Frank said gently, handing Samuel a cup of coffee. Samuel snorted. "I feel worse." Frank nodded toward the pasture. "He's not the same either." Samuel followed his gaze. Noir stood near the fence, staring back at the barn, unmoving. Frank hesitated. "You ever think maybe you don't have to ride to be with him?" Samuel frowned. "What does that even mean?" Frank shrugged. "Means maybe he doesn't care where you sit, just that you're there." The words settled slowly. That evening, Samuel did something different. Instead of sitting on the porch, he walked out into the pasture, slowly, carefully, and sat down on the grass near where Noir grazed. The horse froze. Samuel stayed still. "I'm not going anywhere," he said quietly. After a moment, Noir took a cautious step closer, then another. Eventually, he stood beside Samuel, head lowered, breathing softly. Samuel smiled faintly. "See? Still us." They stayed like that until the sun dipped low. From then on, it became a routine. Samuel walked with Noir instead of riding, brushed him longer, talked more, listened, and something unexpected happened. The bond didn't fade. It changed. Noir learned to walk slower, to stop when Samuel stopped, to wait without being asked. Samuel learned that love wasn't proven by how much you could endure. It was proven by what you were willing to give up. One morning, Samuel took the saddle down from its hook. He cleaned it carefully. Then he carried it to the far corner of the barn and wrapped it in cloth. "I'm not throwing you away," he said softly. "Just resting you." Noir watched, calm. Samuel stepped back into the sunlight, heart heavy but steady. He wasn't the man he had been, but he was still Noir's man, and that, he was beginning to understand, might be enough. The night Samuel Harlan's heart faltered for the second time. It did not announce itself with drama. There was no fall, no sirens at first, no witnesses, just silence. Samuel was sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of tea cooling untouched in front of him. Outside, the wind pushed gently against the walls of the house, carrying the distant sound of Noir shifting in the pasture. It should have been a peaceful night, but Samuel felt it immediately. A tightening, slow, deliberate, wrapping around his chest like a hand that knew exactly where to squeeze. His breath shortened. His vision blurred at the edges. "No," he whispered. "Not now." He pressed a hand against his sternum, willing the sensation to pass. He had followed the rules, taken the pills, rested, changed his life. His body did not care. The pain deepened, spreading into his left shoulder, down his arm. Samuel pushed his chair back, standing too quickly, dizziness crashing into him like a wave. He grabbed the edge of the counter. "Easy," he told himself, though fear crept into his voice. Outside, Noir lifted his head. Samuel didn't know how he knew. He just did. He felt the horse's awareness like a pull in his chest, stronger than the pain. He stumbled toward the door, every step a negotiation. The handle felt cold in his shaking hand. The door swung open. Cool night air rushed in, sharp and grounding. Samuel stepped onto the porch, breathing hard. "Noir," he called weakly. The black horse was already moving. Noir trotted toward the house, hooves thudding softly against the earth. He stopped just below the porch, head raised, eyes locked on Samuel's face. Samuel tried to speak again, but his voice failed him. His knees buckled. He collapsed onto the porch boards, pain exploding through his chest as his breath vanished completely. Noir surged forward, rearing slightly in alarm before stopping himself. He snorted loudly, urgently, pacing at the edge of the porch. Samuel lay on his side, gasping, vision darkening. Not like this, he thought. Not alone. Noir let out a sharp, piercing whinny, louder than any Samuel had ever heard from him. The sound tore through the night, echoing across the fields toward the road. Again, and again. Noir backed away suddenly, then ran, not into the darkness, but toward the fence line near the road. He stopped there, stamping, calling, making himself impossible to ignore. Lights flickered on in the distance. A porch light, then another. A truck engine started. Noir ran back to Samuel, nudging him hard with his nose, then turned and ran back toward the road again. A signal. A plea. Samuel drifted in and out, the world narrowing to pain and sound. He felt warmth against his cheek, Noir's breath, fast and panicked. "It's okay," Samuel tried to say. Nothing came out. Headlights cut across the pasture. Voices shouted. "Over here." Footsteps pounded. Hands lifted Samuel, voices urgent practiced. Someone pressed something cold against his face, forcing air into his lungs. "He's in bad shape," a woman said. "Call it in." Sirens followed. Closer this time, faster. As they loaded Samuel onto the stretcher, Noir stood rigid, trembling, eyes never leaving him. He tried to follow, only stopping when someone held him gently but firmly. "It's all right," a man said softly. "We've got him." The ambulance doors closed. Noir screamed. The sound was raw, broken, a sound that came not from fear, but from knowing exactly what was at stake. Samuel woke 2 days later. The room was quiet, dim. Machines beeped steadily. His chest felt heavy, sore, but he was breathing, alive. A doctor sat beside him, expression serious. "You're very lucky," she said. "Again." Samuel closed his eyes. "Noir," he whispered. "He saved you," the doctor said simply. "Your neighbor said that horse alerted half the road." Tears slipped from the corners of Samuel's eyes. "I didn't ride him," he murmured. "I didn't push." The doctor nodded. "And that's why you're still here. But this was a warning you can't ignore." Samuel knew that. When he returned home days later, weaker than ever, Noir stood waiting at the fence. Samuel didn't walk toward him right away. He sat down on the grass instead. Noir approached slowly, carefully, and stood beside him. Samuel rested his head against the horse's shoulder. "I won't fight my body anymore," he whispered. "I promise." Noir breathed out softly, steady and warm. Samuel smiled faintly. He had fallen once from the saddle, and once from his own body. But he had learned something in the falling. Love was not about holding on to who you used to be. It was about staying, however you could, for as long as you were allowed. Samuel Harlan understood now that time was no longer something he could outrun. It moved quietly beside him, not rushing, not threatening, just present. Like Noir, like the steady rhythm of breath and heartbeat, that Samuel learned to listen to instead of challenge. The doctors were honest when they spoke to him the last time. "There will be good days," one had said gently. "And there will be days when your body asks you to rest. Truly rest." Samuel nodded. He didn't argue anymore. Back on the farm, life settled into a softer shape. Mornings were slower. Samuel no longer woke before the sun out of stubborn habit. He woke when his body allowed it, wrapped himself in a sweater, and stepped onto the porch to find Noir already waiting near the fence. Always waiting. "You're more punctual than I am now," Samuel murmured one morning, managing a small smile. Noir flicked an ear, calm and patient. Samuel spent less time doing and more time being. He sat in the pasture with Noir instead of walking it. He brushed the horse while seated on a low stool. He talked about nothing, about everything. About his wife. About the years he worked too hard. About the fear he used to mistake for weakness. Noir listened. One afternoon, Samuel felt a familiar tightness return. Not sharp, not terrifying, but insistent. A reminder. He sat down immediately, pressing a hand against his chest, breathing slowly like he'd been taught. Noir stepped closer, placing himself between Samuel and the open field, lowering his head until it hovered just above Samuel's shoulder. "I know," Samuel whispered. "I'm listening." The tightness eased. That night, Samuel opened the drawer where he kept important things. Deeds. Papers. The notebook he'd started months ago. He added one final page. Noir is not to be separated from this land. He prefers quiet voices and routine. He will wait for you if you're late. Don't make him. Samuel closed the notebook carefully. The next morning, Frank came by. "You look tired," Frank said softly. Samuel nodded. "I am." Frank hesitated. "You want to take Noir today?" "Just for a bit." Samuel looked toward the pasture. Noir stood, watching them, ears forward. "No," Samuel said gently. "He should stay." Frank studied him for a moment. "You sure?" Samuel smiled faintly. "He's not waiting for a ride. He's waiting for me." Days passed, then weeks. Samuel grew thinner, slower, but calmer. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Samuel sat on the grass near the fence, legs stretched out, back resting against the post. Noir stood beside him, head lowered, mane brushing Samuel's shoulder. "This is enough," Samuel whispered. "You're enough." The horse shifted slightly, pressing closer. Samuel's breathing grew shallow as the light faded from gold to blue. He closed his eyes, listening to familiar sounds. Wind in the grass, Noir's steady breath. His own heart doing its best. "I used to think falling was failure," he murmured. "Turns out falling taught me how to stay." His voice faded. Noir lowered his head fully now, resting it gently against Samuel's chest. Minutes passed. The world grew quiet. When Frank came looking for Samuel later that night, he found him exactly where he'd left him, sitting peacefully against the fence, eyes closed, face calm. Noir stood guard. He did not move when Frank approached. He did not panic. He did not cry. He simply stood there, solid and still, as if he understood. Samuel had not fallen this time. He had stopped, gently. In the days that followed, the farm felt different again, but not empty. Frank kept his promise. Noir stayed. The pasture remained quiet. People came by sometimes, speaking softly, touching the fence, leaving flowers. Noir waited, not in fear, in memory. On the fence, Frank nailed a small wooden sign. Samuel's field, where love stayed. And every morning, when the sun rose over the land, a black horse stood beneath it, still loyal, breathing, carrying the proof that some bonds do not end when the body does. They simply remain. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that love doesn't need strength to endure, only presence, subscribe, like, and share this story with someone who understands that even in illness, even in limitation, love can still stand strong. More emotional stories from the Heartland are coming.